Today I'm going to teach you how to make a shrimp and okra gumbo. I decided to do a voiceover after the fact because our house was so loud when I was cooking this. There was no way you'd be able to hear anything I was saying. So I start by putting some oil in a large pot and chop 4 onions. I actually would have probably used a little bit more in this recipe, but this is all I had on hand and it came out just fine. So I'll chop up the 4 onions and 1 bell pepper. Now, if you notice, I'm taking all the peelings and ends and putting them in a gallon-sized Ziploc bag. That's because I'm going to use that later whenever I make chicken bone broth. And I like to use the scraps in that instead of using whole onions and everything else. So I kind of save that until it's time. Also, I'm going to put the recipe for this in the description because I am actually going to make the base of this a little bigger than I normally would because I like to take the smothered okra with the meat in it and pull it out before I add the liquid for us to eat dinner before we actually make the gumbo. Just a smothered okra with meat in it. It's great over rice. What isn't great over rice, right? And we're going to let those onions and bell peppers cook on a medium-low heat for a good while. We want to let them saute and get really soft. Actually, want them to get a little on the brown side before we go on to our next step here. So while that is cooking, we're going to get another pot and we're going to fill it about halfway up with water and bring that to a boil. Then we're going to take about 4 pounds of salted pork. So we call that salt meat here. I'm actually not sure if they sell this other places outside of South Louisiana, but I've got 4 pounds of salted pork. We're going to boil that first because we want to boil this good bit of the salt out of it so that it is not super salty. If you cut this up and put it straight into anything you're cooking, you will not be able to eat it because of how much salt there is. Now I had to take some water out of that before it began boiling or it would have overflowed. So now we've got our vegetables are pretty brown. I am adding 3 quart-sized bags of smothered okra. Now this is okra that we had gotten last year. Some of it we smothered ourselves and some of it we bought from a lady who does it locally here. So this has been cooked down until it just falls apart. The thing about putting okra in a gumbo, if you use it whole or don't smother it down completely, that's what makes a very slimy gumbo. We do not like a slimy gumbo. But by smothering it beforehand and just cooking it till it falls apart, it just adds great flavor without the slime. So I'll do another video later to show you how I do it. I do mine in a slow cooker and it just turns out perfect every single time. So we're going to let that cook on a medium-low heat. I'll actually usually turn the fire up to high, get it heated, and then turn it back to medium-low heat and just let it cook in to the vegetables for probably about 10 minutes or so. So while that is continuing to cook, I'm going to start cutting up my meat. So we've got smoked sausage here. I like to slice it down the middle and then cut it into pieces after. So once we get all of this sliced up, we're going to then begin to work on cutting up that boiled salt meat. Once it's been boiling for about 10 minutes or so, we'll be able to pull it out and let it cool for a bit and then chop it up. Now, by the time I got to this point, I had the okra cooked down to about where I wanted it, about 15 minutes or so. So I dumped in the smoked sausage, and as I cut up the salt meat and diced it up, I put it straight into the pot and let it begin to cook down. So you really want to start getting that sausage cooked down already. This salt meat is boiled and cooked. We want that to begin to add flavor as well as soak in the flavor of the okra. So it adds the flavor to the okra and takes some of the flavor from the okra. It is so good. If you have not had salted pork in something, you're missing out. So look at your stores, make sure they have it, and pick some up and make this dish. Now that I've got all the meat chopped up and put into the pot, I'll stir that in and I'm gonna let it cook for about another 15 to 20 minutes. So around this part, you're gonna wanna start adding your seasonings, but you're gonna wanna taste before you add anything, because that salt meat's gonna add a little bit of salt to the okra. So I decided to add some Tony's. I always add Tony's to this, Tony Chachere's or whatever your favorite Cajun seasoning is, and some pepper, some garlic powder, and I'm gonna stir that in and let that cook for a little bit to soak in those flavors. I'm also gonna add a little bit of chicken bone broth here, just so that it doesn't stick to the bottom of the pot. Anytime that it starts to stick, you're gonna wanna add a little bit of liquid, whether that be chicken broth or water. I have added water and it comes out great, but if I have the chicken bone broth on hand, I am always adding that in because it adds so much great flavor to this dish. So after that's been cooking for about 15 to 20 minutes, we're gonna add our shrimp in and we're gonna let that begin to cook. We're gonna let that cook for about another 10 to 15 minutes until the shrimp is cooked all the way through, and then we should be good. Now here's where I realized this pot is really not gonna be big enough. So I swapped out to a bigger pot and dumped everything that I had just done into this pot and continued on with the process. And if at any point it begins to stick to the bottom of the pot, just add some liquid to it. So I'm adding a little bit of chicken broth here and just gonna stir it in to loosen things up, get a lot of that flavor off the bottom of the pot and stop things from sticking. Now that that's been cooking for about the 10 to 15 minute mark since I've put my shrimp in, it is time to add the liquid for the gumbo. But before I do that, I'm gonna pull some of this out, and that is going to be our dinner tonight. So it's smothered okra with the shrimp, the sausage, the salted pork, and we're gonna serve that over rice, and it is delicious. And that's Jayani dancing in the background. So now it's time to add the liquid in. I like to use chicken bone broth just because it adds great flavor, but you can use regular chicken broth or you can just add water and it'll be just fine. The reason that this bone broth looks this way is because it's bone broth that we made ourselves and stuck in the fridge, so it has solidified a bit. Now, what I'm adding now is something that I'm adding just because we have it. It's not necessarily in the recipe, but when I have it, I put it. So I've got 3 bay leaves, a little bit of parsley that I had left over from a recipe earlier in the week, and then I have tons of freeze-dried green onions. So I just put a couple cups of it in there and stirred that together, and we're gonna let that cook for another 30 to 40 minutes. This is where the flavor is really built into this gumbo. So I put the fire back up to high just until it gets boiling. And once it's boiling, I will reduce the heat down to a medium low. I'm also going to add a little bit more water here, probably about a quart of water, just because I thought that it looked a little bit too thick still. And so we're going to let that cook for another 30 to 40 minutes. And when it is, when the 30 to 40 minutes is done, we're going to taste for seasoning. You can add a little more salt, a little more pepper, whatever it is that you think it needs. Even teaspoon or so of crab oil can be added if you'd like a little more kick to it. I actually did not do it to this pot of gumbo because the sausage that I used had enough kick in it that it did not need anything more. And once that 30 to 40 minutes of simmering is done, it is time to turn that fire off and we are ready to eat. All right, it's done. Let's give it a try. Now this is good. You have got to try this recipe. Shrimp and okra gumbo. Try it out. Let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. See y'all next time.